Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And it is time for our live stream going out all over the world. People, in different time zones are tuning in. This is the moment we've been waiting for. So, how are you, Peter? Still freezing in the Moscow ice?
No, it's in between everything. It's that dreadful between +2 and -2. That's hell. Okay, because you get a little bit of moisture and then it freezes. Okay, and it's slippery. It's very slippery. You have to be very careful outside. But the city authorities determined a couple of weeks ago the winter was over, so they've really pretty much cleaned up the city. Again, that's another element of the Russian winter people never consider. It's a huge job to clean up, And another thing, another oddity about living in this country is, today is what, March 3rd?
Yep.
Okay, well, on March 1st, they finally took down the Christmas New Year's decorations. It's really maddening, okay? I mean, it's beautiful, but it was like 2 months ago.
It's very strange because I'd always grown up with this notion that you throw out your Christmas tree on winter's on the winter 12 days after the winter, the Epiphany, 12 days after Christmas, you throw it out. But it's not the case in Hungary. Just people keep their Christmas trees for weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards. It's very, very odd. I mean, I've always been used to boom, January the 6th, out it goes. But I'm bizarre that I find it bizarre that people hold on to their trees for a long time. Anyway, Peter, it's been a quite eventful few hours since we last convened, and so we had the meeting, the European meeting. To which the bolting chihuahuas were not invited. Everyone else got invited. They didn't get invited. Okay.
Even Trudeau was there.
Even Trudeau was there, and then this woman from Denmark, who's this ubiquitous person, very hawkish. And the Finns were there, and it was kind of really bizarre because, of course, you had Zelensky, who was hugged by everyone. It's like this. He needed reassurance after this manhandling he had to endure.
But isn't NATO a military alliance and not a self-help group? I'm getting really confused.
Yeah, very well put. Yes, yeah, they had to reassure it. They all hugged him, so they took their lead.
It's too touchy. I'm not a touchy.
Not me neither. And then he had an audience with the king at Sandringham. And for 1 hour, they spoke. I don't know what they spoke about for a whole hour, but he was there. And rather amusingly, there are all these politicians in the UK demanding that the invitation to Trump for a state visit be rescinded. We need to rescind the invitation to
Trump. We'll show him.
Exactly. Now, the problem is, first of all, if Trump gets annoyed, he might say, "I'm not coming." So you don't want to play that card too much, because he might just say, "I don't need this. You invited me. I didn't invite myself. You invited me. I don't need this."
And why are they mixing these things here? Okay, it's really inappropriate. I mean, it should have nothing to do with Ukraine. I mean, exactly. It probably would have, and I'm not joking, everybody, more about landscaping. Both of them like it, apparently. Okay. No, you really shouldn't be mixing these things. It's wrong. It's wrong.
I agree. And so far, Keir Starmer has said that he's sticking by the royal invitation. But after this meeting, Keir Starmer, made his grand announcement about this upcoming peace plan. Let's see if we can.
I'm really glad you're here, George, because you need to explain it to me, because I read it twice. Okay.
I wish I could explain it. My only explanation is, of course, there is no peace plan. There's no plan to have a peace plan. There's no intention of presenting a peace plan. What they want to do is to sabotage any possible peace by putting front and center this issue of the security guarantees. Because once you have security guarantees, that's it. You don't have a peace plan, because then that's it. Zelensky's got what he wants. He just wants the security guarantees. That's it. He doesn't need to negotiate anything now, because, hey, he's got these guarantees from NATO, and he knows that the Russians are not going to accept any NATO presence in Ukraine. So that's the whole purpose. That's why the only thing that they're presenting, is the security guarantees. And as Trump rightly points out, well, what's the point of talking about how you implement a peace plan when you don't have a plan yet? And they're not even bothering to present any kind of a peace plan. They just want this security guarantees. Well, once it's there, boom, that's it. There's no need for any more negotiations.
And they're not presenting it to Trump. It's a fait accompli, is what
exactly. So here was Starmer, if we can actually see this. And this is, can you see this, Peter?
Yep.
All right, great. So here's the PM remarks at this at the international leaders press conference. And so he says, through my discussions over recent days, we have agreed that the UK, France, and others will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. Then we'll discuss that plan with the United States and take it forward together. The purpose of today's meeting was to unite our partners around this effort to strengthen Ukraine and to support a just and enduring peace. And then he goes on, our starting point must be to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position now so that they can negotiate from a position of strength. But isn't that what we've been hearing for 3 years now? I mean, that's exactly, there's nothing here other than the same song. And we are doubling down in our support. Yesterday evening, the UK signed a 2.2 billion pound loan.
Loan. Oh yeah. A loan. Okay.
A loan.
to Zelensky. Great.
That's right. It's a loan. We want it back, the first of the month, to provide more military aid to Ukraine. Back.
Well, what have you been doing for 3 years?
Exactly.
The cupboard is bare.
That's right. But back not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. Now,
I'm sorry, they're stolen assets. Excuse me.
Well, exactly. Now, I'm assuming the Russian assets they talk about, these are private. These are assets of individuals that have been frozen by the British government. I don't think they're talking about those the sovereign assets, the central bank reserves that have been frozen. So I'm assuming these are all these various.
Yeah, well, they're going to be in the courts for decades.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, either way, whether you're using profits or the actual assets, you're still stealing somebody else's property. So, and today I'm announcing a new deal which allows Ukraine to use 1.6 billion pounds of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defense missiles, which will be made in Belfast and creating jobs in our brilliant defense sector. He's trying to sound like Trump here.
It's very Trumpian.
Yeah. Yes, a brilliant defense sector. This will be vital for protecting critical infrastructure now and strengthening Ukraine in securing the peace when it comes. So far, where's the peace plan? I mean, you're not talking about anything peace. You're just continuing as before. Because we have to learn from the mistakes of the past. We cannot accept a weak deal like Minsk, which Russia can breach with ease. And then instead,
I'm not sure. Is he referring to the same Minsk process that you and I are aware of?
I assume so. The one that Hollande and Merkel said we never had any intention of sticking by it.
And then Poroshenko said that as well after he left the presidency.
That's right.
And during the Zelensky presidency, they openly walked away from it.
That's right. Instead, any deal must be backed by strength. Every nation must contribute to that in the best way that it can, bringing different capabilities and support to the table. So a deal must be backed by strength. What's the deal? This is why there really is no deal. And there's not going to be any kind of a deal. They just want this is just a way of justifying continuing to pour money and arms into Ukraine, but they're pretending to be talking Trump's language because Trump is talking about peace and deal. So suddenly they're all talking about peace and deals, even though they haven't been talking about that at all for 3 years.
Well, see, the most important difference here. This is just all hogwash. George is doing it pro forma for us. Who's talking to the Russians?
Oh,
Oh, the Trump administration is, because they're talking about, well, first, renormalizing relations and with the aim of resolving the Ukraine conflict. We don't have any of this here.
No, not whatsoever, and that's why this whole thing is fake. It's completely phony, and I want to show a little bit from the interviews given by some Trump officials over the weekend. So at least the Trump people are talking something specific about peace, and the only way you can negotiate a peace is by talking to the Russians. Simply talking among yourselves, that's not going to get you anywhere, and that's all Starmer is promising here. Just talking among ourselves. Um, and then he says, so we agreed some important steps today. Oh, step one, we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia. Well, that's the plan. So we will keep the military aid flowing and keep increasing the
Well,
economic.
how's that been working out?
Yes, quite. To strengthen Ukraine now. Okay. Second, we agree that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. And this third, in the event of a peace deal, we will keep boosting Ukraine's own defense capabilities. So we're going to just keep pouring in arms in preparation, obviously, for the next round. I mean, why are you pouring in arms if there's a peace deal?
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of like, all these are pieces into a jigsaw puzzle, and there's this one really gaping hole. It's called the peace plan.
The peace plan, yeah. And then to deter any future invasion. So that's again to deter any future invasion. But that isn't part of any peace plan. I mean, deterring a future invasion, that's essentially the guaranteeing the continuance of the war, and that's exactly what Zelensky was doing. And that Zelensky, that's why he says that. Well, I just want these security guarantees, because once you have the security guarantees, then there's no need to negotiate, because why negotiate? You've basically got a blank check. And that's the whole point. That's the point of all of this talk is, well, let's give Ukraine a blank check, which means the war continues. Fourth, we will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend the deal in Ukraine. Again, it's all about, we're going to keep arming Ukraine, defend the deal, guarantee the peace. What deal? What peace?
What's the deal?
Yeah.
I mean, you're not missing like an asterisk that we go to the bottom that says what the deal means.
Right. And to get this, not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Boots on the ground and planes in the air. So that's quite a peace deal. You've got boots on the ground, planes in the air. I don't know. That doesn't sound like a peace agreement to me. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting, but to support peace on our continent and to succeed, the effort must have strong U.S. backing.
The penny drops.
The penny drops, yeah. We're working with the U.S. on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week.
Are they really working on this?
I doubt it. I mean, Trump said, the question was asked. He said, oh, the British don't need us. They're really strong. They're tough guys. They don't need us to help them. And let me be clear, we agree with the president on the urgent need for a durable peace. See, notice how they suddenly changed their tone. They're talking about their language. Oh, peace. They haven't been talking 3 years. They've said nothing about any of this. And suddenly they're talking about peace and deal just in order to keep in with Trump. But you can see how insincere all of this is. So that was that's the upshot of the Lancaster House meeting. And then we had, I hope this will work. Last time it didn't work. I want to just show a little bit from the interviews over the weekend with some of the Trump officials. Now let's see if this is going to work.
Marco Rubio. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us.
Did you hear it,
this
Peter?
morning. Has there been any contact with President Zelensky since Friday?
Well, I haven't had any contact with him since Friday. We have plenty of contacts with him, though. Plenty. I mean, he met in the last 10 days. He's met with the Secretary of Commerce. He spoke to the president on the phone. Met with the Secretary of Commerce. Met with me. Met with the Vice President. Met with our special envoy, and then was invited and came over on. Well, invited. You know, he wanted to come over on Friday to sign this commercial deal that didn't happen. So there's been plenty of contact with them. I've talked to the foreign minister several times. Not since then. And we'll see moving forward. I think the last line in the president's Truth Social post is the one to focus in on, and that is, we'll be ready to re-engage when they're ready to make peace, which is clearly what the president's goal is here. He's trying to get Russia to the table to bring about, to see if there's a way to bring about an end to this conflict. That's his goal. That's his only goal. That's his centralized focus. And, hopefully we'll get to a point where that's possible.
The British Prime Minister said this morning that the United Kingdom and France are working on a peace plan with Ukraine to present to the U.S. Do you know where things stand with that plan?
No, I mean, I've talked to both of the foreign ministers of France and the UK yesterday, and I explained to them sort of the events leading up to what you saw on Friday. Look, I think what's really important here is to understand the dynamic. The president is basically saying there's this horrible war. It's been going on for 3 years. It is a bloody stalemate, a meat grinder type war, and he wants it to end. How does it end? It's very simple. The only way it ends is if Vladimir Putin comes to a negotiating table. And right now, President Trump is the only person on earth who has any chance whatsoever of bringing him to a table to see what it is he would be willing to end the war on. Now, maybe their claims or what they want, their demands will be unreasonable. We don't know, but we have to bring him to the table. You're not going to bring him to the table if you're calling him names, if you're being antagonistic. That's just the president's instincts from years and years and years of putting together deals as someone who's in business. And that's the only goal here.
Let me just stop you there for 1 second.
Why is it a war with no end in sight?
Why is it okay to call President Zelensky Why is it okay to call President Zelensky a dictator, but not, as you say, call Vladimir Putin names?
Listen, we've spent 3 years calling Vladimir Putin names. That's not the point. The point that we're at now is we're trying to get the man to a table, the Russians. And I've said from the very beginning, maybe they don't want a deal either. We don't know. But we haven't talked to them in 3 years. But maybe they do. The point is, do we want to make... I would ask everybody this. If there are no negotiations, what is the alternative? Another 4 years of war, another 3 years of war, in which the United States and Europe continues to pour billions of dollars into a war in Ukraine? Is that the alternative? I've asked every foreign minister I meet with, tell me your idea of how this turns out. Most don't have a plan. A few have said, well, let's give them another year of fighting. A year from now, a year later, after another year of death, another year of destruction, then maybe Putin will be ready to negotiate at that point. That doesn't sound like a good plan to me, and it certainly is not a plan the president's on board with.
It's not just about getting people to the table. It's about keeping agreements that are made. And that was one of the points that President Zelensky was making in the Oval Office on Friday, is that Vladimir Putin has not kept the agreements that were made in the past. Wasn't he right about that?
What is it? Moving forward is the question, not the past. No one here is claiming Vladimir Putin is going to get the Nobel Peace Prize this year, or that he should be the man of the year of the Humanitarian Association. What we're arguing here is he has a very large country. They're in full war footing. They're cranking out weapons now at a war footing pace. And we need to figure out, is there a way to get them to stop the war? And the only way you're going to do that is to get Russians engaged in negotiations, something the Europeans haven't able to do, the Biden administration wasn't able to do or didn't even try.
Papanopoulos should be hired by the Ukrainians as a spokesperson.
Yes. Rubio kind of...
Marco Rubio, if he was just blunt and said the truth, is that, there was called the Minsk process, and we have the French president and we have the German chancellor,
absolutely.
Can he say that? I mean, it's public knowledge, George. It's not like a secret.
Yeah. No, that's right. He missed the opening there. He didn't. Trump would have said, he would have used that opportunity to say, there are two sides to that. The Russians, they make their claim and the Ukrainians make their claim. And then, but, that's not my concern. My concern is to get a peace deal. But at least he would have acknowledged, there are actually, two sets of sides. Because he said that during the press availability, Zelensky, he's saying bad things about Putin, but the Russians are saying bad things about Zelensky. So there's no love lost between the two sides. Anyway, just a little bit more.
Figure out whether there's anything. What are the Russians' demands? Under what conditions would the Russians be willing to stop this war? And as I said, we don't know what those are because we haven't.
Yes, we do.
Years. That's the singular goal here, is to try to bring about an end to this conflict, and it begins by getting them to the table. Ultimately, like any truce, like any peace agreement anywhere in the world, those things will have to be enforced, they'll have to be enduring, there'll have to be safeguards put in place. Everybody understands that, but it begins with the first step, and that is engaging them to see if it's even possible. Because if it's not possible, then what we're looking at is a protracted stalemate with thousands of people dying, billions of dollars pouring in, and more death and destruction. And that's not something the president wants to be a part of. He's made it very clear.
Aren't those talks feasible only if the United States is willing to also provide security guarantees to Ukraine? That was the point that President Zelensky was also making in the Oval Office.
Well, the security guarantees, which I actually like to call deterrence, is all contingent upon there being a peace. Everybody's saying security guarantees to secure the peace. You first have to have a peace. We don't even know if the peace is possible. And this was understood by the Ukrainians. It was explained to them repeatedly. And that is, here's our strategy. We're trying to get Putin to a negotiating table. Let's not rehash. Everyone knows the history here, the back and forth. We understand that. We all understand that. But the question now is, can we get them to a table to negotiate? That's our goal. Don't do anything to disrupt that. And that's what Zelensky did, unfortunately, is he found every opportunity to try to Ukraine-splain on every issue. Then he confronted
I haven't heard this expression, Ukraine-splain.
That's a good one. Good one, Marco. Who wrote it for you? It's good.
Yeah, Ukraine.
This president says the goal here is diplomacy. He immediately jumps in and challenges the vice president. Well, what kind of diplomacy? So we all understand, okay, that Putin is not going to be an easy negotiator in this regard. We all get that. But we have to start the process to see if something is even possible. And I honestly am puzzled. I just don't understand. The Biden administration berated Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israelis, put all kinds of conditions and pressure on them to try to get a ceasefire. In this particular case, we've been nice by comparison. And all we're trying to do here is figure out whether a peace is possible. All these other things that people keep bringing up, that'll have to be a part of a negotiation. Right now, there is no negotiation. Shouldn't we at least try to see if there is a way to end this war in a way that's acceptable to both sides and is enduring and sustainable? How is that a bad thing? I really am puzzled why anyone thinks that trying to be a peacemaker is a bad thing. It's only a bad thing when it's Donald Trump trying to do it, when it's President Trump. To me.
All right, so that was Rubio went on. He wasn't that interesting. It was more interesting. Let me first.
Can I just follow up on what you said about Winston Churchill, because it is interesting. He was definitely a man of the moment during World War II.
This is Mike.
Are you suggesting that President Trump wants Zelensky to resign?
We need a leader that can deal with us, eventually deal with the Russians, and end this war. And if it becomes apparent that President Zelensky's either personal motivations or political motivations are divergent from ending the fighting in his country, then I think we have a real issue on our hands. But look, Donna, let's ask ourselves, what is this war going to look like a year from now? The patience of the American people to keep giving billions and billions and billions with no end in sight is not unlimited. And we also made that clear to President Zelensky at the end of that meeting.
So you're saying he might
time on his side is time on the American people's side. What I'm saying is this war needs to end, and that's going to take concessions on territory. That's going to take Russian concessions on security guarantees. That's going to take all sides coming to the table, and we are working very hard to drive those negotiations forward. We had our engagement in Riyadh with the Russians. We are working to have an engagement. We thought a deal with the Ukrainians, and then we'll bring all sides together. That only President Trump can do that. And I find it incredulous he's being criticized for that.
You just mentioned a specific concession potentially that you would like Vladimir Putin to make. Can you elaborate on that? Because we haven't heard any specifics before.
Well, we can't get any specifics from the Ukrainians, but this will clearly be some type of territorial concession for security guarantees going forward. I mean, that has been discussed in previous rounds of
security
negotiations,
guarantee from
and we
the
think
US.
that is a broader framework.
Who guarantees that security?
Well, right now, some first principles. This needs to be a permanent end, not a temporary end. This needs to be European-led security guarantees going forward. Part of that is Europe's contribution to its own defense, so it has the capability to do so. We've had both the United Kingdom and France talking about their troops on the ground going forward. And then, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. What type of support we provide or not is to be negotiated. But one thing is clear, we do not see Ukraine being a member of NATO, because that would automatically drag U.S. troops in. But Donna, look, we need to get all sides of the table, and we're very frustrated that we did not see that from the Ukrainians after we had negotiated a minerals deal that would bind us together, grow their economy, and change the nature of our aid so that the American taxpayer could recoup.
What are your conversations?
That was all done and ready to be signed on Friday.
What are your conversations like right now with the Russians in terms of reopening conversations and perhaps diplomatic normalization, embassies, and so forth?
Well, Secretary Rubio's team at a working level have met with the Russians about broadening our embassy operations. They were virtually shut down on all sides. It's just a practical matter and common sense. If we're going to drive these negotiations forward, our embassies have to be operable. Those conversations are happening. And we're also having conversations about how they will end and what they need to see to end this war. There will obviously be differences on all sides, and the United States, through shuttle diplomacy and the leadership of President Trump, will drive forward to bridge those gaps. Our point is, talking about the fine details of security guarantees is like talking about the details of a warranty before you know if you're going to buy the thing. We're driving both sides of the negotiating table, and yet people are trying to put the cart before the horse.
And last question, there are reports that the Trump administration, you are talking about pausing offensive cyber operations against Russia. Is that true?
That has not been part of our discussions. There will be all kinds of...
I heard that too today.
There's an article in the New York Times about that they're halting the cyber operation, but it's kind of very interesting because the way the Times presents it is that but the Russians are continuing with this huge cyber attacks against the United States, but the problem is that they don't really have any evidence of any of that. So it's essentially they're saying, look what the Russians are doing. But all the New York Times comes up with is just regurgitating the same old claims. Russia did this and they conducted an assassination of some, or they tried to assassinate some CEO of, I think, IG Metal or whatever. All this nonsense. And I suspect they looked and said, "There's no evidence for it." They said, we've distracted from other more serious operations. Instead, we've been engaged in this wild goose chase about what the Russians are up to. But I want to. The one that I thought was quite interesting was Treasury Secretary Scott.
Yes.
Bessent. This is quite interesting.
Okay. We'll be watching that space. I want to ask you about Ukraine. You were in that Oval Office meeting that went sideways on Friday.
Went sideways.
President Zelensky was told to leave the White House before he signed the minerals agreement that I know you have been working on. He said yesterday, though, he is ready to sign it. He called it the first step towards security guarantees. It's not enough. We need more than just that. A ceasefire without security guarantees is dangerous for Ukraine. Is the deal still on the table, or has President Trump instructed you to drop the project?
It is impossible to have an economic deal without a peace deal. The sine qua non for an economic deal is that Ukrainian leadership wants a peace deal.
I thought this was a building block towards getting to
Well,
a peace deal.
it was supposed to be, but President Zelensky came into the Oval on Friday there were three things that were going to be done. There was going to be a press conference. There was going to be a private lunch with 16 of us. And as you could see from Dan Scavino's the post on his X account, we were already set up to sign the deal. So it's unclear now. President Zelensky has thrown off the sequencing. And Margaret, let me tell you the most tragic part of this. The President Trump's idea for this economic arrangement was to further intertwine the American people and the Ukrainian people and show no daylight, to show the Russian leadership that there was no daylight. And President Zelensky came into the Oval Office and tried to relitigate in front of the world the deal. And the place to have done it would have been in the private lunch.
Okay, well, it's news to me that this was, that the sequencing is shifting, that you were saying you have to agree to a peace deal before the minerals agreement. There aren't even negotiations for a peace deal underway.
Well, first of all, it's not a minerals agreement. It's a general economic agreement. So calling it a minerals agreement is incorrect. And I think we have to see if President Zelensky wants to proceed. What's the use in having an economic agreement that's going to be rendered moot if he wants the fighting to continue? President Trump wants a peace deal.
Mm-hmm. Vladimir Putin, it's unclear if he wants the peace deal, though. There are no negotiations underway. The Secretary of State said that on another network this morning.
Yeah, and President Trump has said that. President Trump is trying to move towards peace. He said repeatedly during that episode in the Oval, we don't know if we'll get a peace deal, but we got to try.
Okay. Last Sunday, President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, said on another network that the plan for negotiations was the so-called draft Istanbul Protocol. The Institute for the Study of War says that this would leave Ukraine helpless in the face of future Russian threats or aggression.
Institute for the Study of War.
Described as the future of U.S. diplomacy and the framework. Why isn't Mr. Zelensky asking the right question when he says, how can I agree to a ceasefire with no security guarantees, or even a minerals agreement or investment agreement without security guarantees?
Well, look, I think the plan is for the European Union to provide this security, not NATO, the European Union. And again, the tragedy of Friday, and I don't know what President Zelensky was thinking. We had President of France, Emmanuel Macron, in on Monday. Great meeting. We had Prime Minister Keir Starmer on Thursday. Fantastic meeting. They were all on board the arc of the peace agreement. All President Zelensky had to do was come in and sign this economic agreement, and again, show no daylight between Ukrainian people and the American people, and he chose to blow that up.
So the deal's no longer on the table, just to be abundantly clear.
Not at present.
That was a very interesting what he said there, because what he said actually makes sense. You can't have an economic agreement without a peace agreement. Who's going to sink any capital into Ukraine while there's a war?
That's what I've been saying all along. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I didn't get it, and there was the sequencing. And I guess the sequencing, it binds us together. Yeah, it binds you together. But even so, whether it binds you together, you still can't have an economic agreement unless there's a peace agreement. And he's a very rich man. He's a billionaire, a very successful hedge fund investor. And to him that it's a fairly obvious we can't do it. And then he said, pretty much there. It's off the table. I mean, as long as Zelensky is not willing to negotiate seriously any kind of a peace agreement, then there's no economic agreement. Zelensky can say, "Hey, I'm ready to sign the economic agreement." He said, "Well, that's no good. I mean, it goes together. The two are inextricably entwined." And I think he's the only one who's actually said that of all the officials, that you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and again, it was the hook. I mean, the Trump administration is very standoffish when it comes to NATO, because it would be the U.S. that would have to always do the heavy lifting. This agreement was a halfway house. I mean, in some ways, and I'm maybe backtracking a little bit or re-exploring it, I mean, it's actually kind of a clever ploy, okay? because it shows a commitment by the United States, though it's clearly undefined, and I think intentionally as well.
Yes.
Okay, and more than anything else, I mean, something that we said earlier is that Trump can say this is a win. We're on the path. Okay, we're normalizing relations with the Russians. We're engaging the Ukrainians on something that is tangible, economic. Instead of we're going to fight for your democracy, whatever that means. Okay, I never understand what that means. But is this a good deal? Would it have been a good deal for Ukraine? I don't think so. Okay, but when you're an imperial power, you get to you get your way with weaker powers.
You see, I thought that it's not a bad deal because this is what I was saying yesterday, that it's like a creditor and a debtor because okay, you're hopelessly in debt. And then the creditor says, well, you know what? I'm going to take over all your businesses. I'm going to take over your life. And that's really very unpleasant. But on the other hand, the creditor, says, I now have a vested interest in your security. I don't want anything to happen to you because then you won't be able to pay all that you owe me. And that's something. I mean, this is what Tony Soprano would do. He takes over a business and say, but now I'm going to protect you. I don't want anyone else. I don't want any other creditor to come along and start leaning on you. And so that's why it's not a bad deal from Ukraine's point of view. I mean, they're going to have to pay or whatever, but that's still down the road. But now the Americans are saying, we're looking after you.
And down the road is appropriately expressed here because irrespective of the fortunes of Zelensky, at least until the end of Trump's term, that if it had been signed, this is an agreement that they will pursue. Now, Zelensky goes, the Ukraine's military collapse, whatever the scenarios are. Ukraine isn't going anywhere, and Trump is good saying, but we still have a deal. Okay, the next government or people that come to power, we're going to see that's why this is a very interesting, multifaceted approach to all of this. Okay, and considering what some of the things that were said in Riyadh, I think Trump would go into rares with the Russians in Ukraine under some circumstances.
Right.
Okay?
No, that's right. But that's the thing. Trump wants this war to end, and then we can all start making money. I mean, that's his natural mode. Russians can make money. We can make money with the Russians. We can make money with the Ukrainians. We can all make money. That's what he's thinking. But before that can happen, the war needs to come to an end.
And when you're making money, you're not fighting each other.
Exactly.
That's his logic, which is not bad.
That's exactly that's always been the logic of capitalism. Supposedly, when everyone's making money, no one's going to go to war. I mean, I think that's untrue. It has.
Well, we got to get Daniel McAdams on because he likes that one. Okay,
that's right. But basically, I mean, that was the various theories about capitalism. Some people thought, the Leninist theory, capitalists are inevitably going to go to war against one another. But there was the other kind of theory, the sort of the Austrian school theory, which was no, capitalists they're never going to go to war because they're all too busy making money, and why would they want to kill each other if they're all making?
Yeah, and then the First World War happened.
And then the First World War happened. Yeah, but that was an interesting debate.
Let's kind of digest what the Sunday shows and what the Europeans are doing. What are the Europeans doing, George? Right. They don't have the capacity here. I mean, it all sounds all nice. It's an organizing principle. NATO has always been, it's been over the last, I would say, a couple of decades, the organizing principle to organize Europe, the European Union. The NATO is part of that. It's all very convenient. It's almost a reflex. And you feel self-empowered. I mean, you have all these leaders across Europe. They're not very popular, and they found their cause. Okay, and it's Ukraine. But when you take a step back and look at it, so are they playing a game with Trump? Is they playing a game with the United States? What's going on here? And is people like the term, I'll use it, is the deep state trying to torpedo Trump again?
But that of course does raise a very interesting question, because in one sense, I mean, Trump his team are in a minority. They're in a minority in the United States. They're in a minority in
They're in a
Washington.
minority on Twitter.
They're in a
Jeez.
exactly. So you've got the entirety of the European wing of NATO against them, with the exception of Hungary and Slovakia, two very small, insignificant countries. But everyone else is on board. And then in Washington, you've got the media. You see that by the tone of the questions. And then you have Congress, all the Democrats. You even had that the senator from Connecticut. I forgot, big Ukraine hawk. The Democrats saying, "I now regret that I voted to confirm Marco Rubio." They want to continue with the war. So it is interesting. What was the European strategy? There may well be trying to apply pressure against Trump, using the divisions in Washington to apply pressure against Trump. I don't think it's going to work, but that's a part of it. But the interesting thing is, just obviously we don't want it to happen. Suppose something were to happen to Trump. Now, okay,
well, George, there were 2 attempts on his life. I mean, it's fair to say.
A lot depends on him, because, you got J.D. Vance could take over, but Vance doesn't have quite the command and the authority that Trump has. So even if he would try to pursue Trump's policy, he might meet resistance. Rubio may well consider himself, hey, I have seniority over Vance. I've been a senator for years and years and years. I may take orders from Trump. I'm not going to just sit and take orders from you. You're just a junior senator from Ohio. You've just been in the Senate for 2 years, So it's a very interesting, what would happen if suddenly Trump were no longer on the scene. But when you come to the Europeans, it's clear there's no plan. And this is where I want to just show you, because now Macron has come up with an idea.
Okay.
Yes. Yes,
before you do it, I saw Macron's idea, and I had to double check to make sure it wasn't the Onion. Keep going, George.
All right. Brainwave. And the brainwave, where are we? Yes. Here is the brainwave. Is France suggests partial 1-month truce between Russia and Ukraine, a 1-month truce.
Come up with that.
That took some time to work that one out.
Well, okay, George. Before we go further, let's interrogate this type. So when you first read it, okay, what does it mean, partial?
Well,
what does ceasefire mean?
Right,
Is it a unilateral ceasefire?
No, it's a ceasefire. I mean, as we'll see, the ceasefire: air, sea, and no attacks on infrastructure, and no attacks on.
So the Russians have to be on board for that,
right? But so in other words, the ground war can continue. That's an interesting one, because if the ground war continues, what about? Can they still lob missiles and drones at one another, or is that covered by the air truce?
Well, maybe under this plan, Macron could get on a plane, go to the line of contact, say, no, you can't use that. Put that down. Okay, all right, you're right. You can go over over. That's all right. All right, now he could be the referee in the middle of a war.
Well, that's kind of, yes. That's what it sounds like. So here, he says that France is proposing a partial 1-month truce between Russia and Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron and his foreign minister have said, as European efforts to bolster support for Kiev accelerate in the face of uncertain US backing. On Monday, a day after European leaders rallied around Ukraine at a summit in London, Jean-Noël Barrot said such a truce on air, sea, and energy infrastructure would allow us to determine whether Vladimir Putin is acting in good faith and gauge his attitude to real peace negotiations. I don't get that. I don't understand.
Well, I mean,
why would that?
Well, okay. I mean, okay. Taking it apart and trying to fix it. I'm going to try to fix this flawed thinking. If there was a peace plan presented, detailed, and say, this is a peace plan that the European Union, the French president, whoever is presenting, and this is the plan, and we're going to take a first step, a partial ceasefire. That would work. That would be interesting.
That would work. You don't even, incidentally, you wouldn't even need a peace plan. You can say, we can begin negotiations. As of next Monday, we're going to sit and negotiate. But during the negotiations, even though we're far, far from any kind of a peace agreement, during the negotiations, we will have a truce. It would make sense. But just a truce apropos of nothing, well, who's going to agree to this? I mean, it's like, just a truce and allow the other side to gain the unilateral advantage. Who's going to agree to that?
This is probably what happened over the weekend. So Macron says to his counterpart in the UK, I have this idea for a partial peace plan, partial truce. Okay, let's go talk to the Italians about it. Bring the Belgian guy in, okay? Tusk, what do you think about? Hey, that might not be a bad idea. Okay, too bad the Baltics are not here. We could ask them. Okay, You want to talk to the Romanians? No, they have a mess over there right now. We'll leave them out of it. The Spaniard, where's the Spaniard guy? Is he at the buffet? Get him in here. We're thinking about a partial truce. What I'm getting at, everybody, this is groupthink. Oh yeah, it's a great idea. It's a great idea. The problem is you didn't talk to the Russians about it.
No, there is that. But that's why he thinks he's being very cute, as they are in all the talks about the security guarantees. They think they're being very cute because they know that the Russians are going to say no. Just like with they come up with this when Starmer talks repeatedly about the security guarantees. He knows the Russians are going to say no. Of course they're going to say no. He knows this, and so they say, look, the Russians are being unreasonable. Oh, look at that. Look, they say no to these security guarantees. Well, of course they're going to say no. They're not going to allow NATO to build an infrastructure. That's what they mean. They're not just going to get a couple of people with some rifles, hunting rifles. It's going to be a massive, NATO infrastructure operation. That's what they did in Kosovo. The moment they moved in, the NATO peacekeepers, they built Camp Bondsteel. The kind of biggest military base in Europe. That's the point. As soon as you move in, now we bring in our aircraft. Now we build air bases and now we build, missile bases. That's it. They're building a NATO infrastructure. Of course, the Russians are going to say no. But Starmer thinks he can fool people. I mean, he evidently thinks everybody's really stupid and they don't understand the little game he's playing here. And so similarly with this, well, we're going to have a truce. And if the Russians say no to a truce, then we know that Putin isn't serious. Oh, what a clever idea. I mean, anyway, so then, here we are. He says, the French foreign minister continued, never has the risk of a war in Europe, in the European Union, been so high. The threat keeps getting closer to us. The front line keeps getting closer to us. Well, hold a second. You moved into Ukraine. I mean, are they coming to Paris? I mean, are the Russians, heading towards Paris?
Well, I don't want to, be a party pooper here, but I mean, wasn't it NATO that NATOized Ukraine after 2014? I mean,
exactly.
Who's moving in what direction here? That's
exactly.
So if you're in the presidential palace in Paris, you're afraid of the Russian line in
the Russian line. They're moving exactly like Alexander I, on the brink of marching into Paris. And then so that's the the interesting thing is that this idea is so ridiculous that even the British started sort of distancing themselves from it and saying, well, that's a French plan. That's not a Franco-British plan. So Macron thought, well, I need to say something idiotic at this moment in time. I haven't said anything stupid for quite a long time. So he came up with this in the 1 month truce and a partial truce of that. The ground war can continue.
I mean, not in the context of our podcast and our conversations elsewhere, but it seems like the two words that or the flavor of the moment are security guarantees. Well, okay. Well, why don't we spread it out a little bit, everybody? What about security guarantees for everybody? And this is the motif that George and I have been talking about specifically for the last 3 years. Okay. And you have to cross the Rubicon, everybody. If you want to give Ukraine security guarantees, I'm all for it. But everybody else has to have security guarantees. And you cannot define, it is impossible to define Ukraine's genuine security interests if you don't, without taking into account Russia's. This is illogical. It doesn't make any sense, because you can only define security guarantees in the security environment.
Right. But that isn't going to happen. I mean, I think it was so far away from anything like that. I mean, Helsinki, that was 1975. That came after years and years of détente. I mean, that was, when you think of it, Willy Brandt, he launched his Ostpolitik, 1970. The Americans were already engaged in the strategic arms limitation talks that started in 1968. So it was a long process that led to Helsinki. I mean, there's just such absolute pathological Russophobia that prevails in NATO land that hard to see anything positive coming. But what I'm puzzled about, I wonder what you think, is where do we go from here? I mean, here are the Europeans completely. It's like we don't listen to the Americans, we listen to the Europeans, and there's just no common ground at all. I mean, they keep,
we're yes, so you're just passing the hot potato to me. Thanks, George. Why do you think I know? What do you think?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm just what you think.
George is right, because what we're being presented with is it's first of all, it's not comprehend. I cannot comprehend it. Okay, because this is this bar talk? I mean, are you people serious about this? Right. I mean, and Europe working without and against the wishes of the United States. That's hard for me to comprehend, because the entire security architecture of Europe since 1945 has been built around American wishes and designs. Okay, right. I mean, and you're asking me to suspend all of that? Just right. Take that out of the equation.
Let's sort of break it down then. Is it conceivable? Do you think it's conceivable that the Europeans will just simply move their forces in without getting the approval of the Americans? Is that conceivable?
As crazy as it may sound, I think it is possible. That would lead us up the escalation ladder like nobody's business. Okay. Right. Why, everyone? Because Russia will fire on those troops. It does. Right. If it's a NATO flag, they will fire upon it. If it's a British flag, a French flag, whatever, it will be a target.
Right. Well, I agree with you. I think it's a possibility. Because
it shouldn't be, George. It shouldn't be, because logic should say, nope, we can't go there. But they're going beyond this. We're now in unicorn universe.
Well, that's right. And the problem is that there's just simply no common ground at this stage. I mean, the Europeans just going on and on the way at Lancaster House meeting. I mean, it's just, Looney Tunes. And then you've got the Americans who are saying we have to talk to the Russians. We have to negotiate with the Russians. The Europeans say, no, we're not going to talk with the Russians. We're just going to talk among ourselves. And we're going to somehow bring our forces in. Now, so... are the Europeans thinking, are the British and the French thinking that, well, if the Russians do fire on us, then the Americans will feel compelled to come in on our side?
Trump's in the White House.
Trump's in the White House. He's going to say no. And no. You're on your own, pal. I mean, we're not. You're going to have to deal with the Russians yourself. And that's been the case. I mean, with the in the past with the Americans, they just said, hey, if the Europeans fall out with them and decide to do something unilaterally, the Americans will not support them. I mean, we're thinking about the Suez crisis. That's it. They say the British and the French did something. The Americans already told them not to do it. They went ahead and did it. And then the Americans really just pulled the plug on them. And that was Eisenhower, the beloved Eisenhower, who had this, the British had such a soft spot for Eisenhower. He did it to them. So they do this. And Trump, and going against the wishes of Trump is just going to say, I'm not doing this for you. I'm not bailing you out.
Because Trump has bigger plans. He wants to normalize relations with Russia because he feels that in the long term, that is a net positive for American foreign policy and his legacy, by the way, because again, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but his eyes are on China, and he thinks he can do a reverse Nixon goes to China. I think that's too late, but it could create an environment of a Yalta 2.0 and spheres of influence, which people we shouldn't. We don't believe in spheres of influence. The whole neoliberal junk. Well, I'll tell you what, everybody. Spheres of influence tend to keep the peace.
Right. No, that's right. So I think we could say that that's a possibility. I mean, then they would say, can the Europeans get on the on Trump? Abandon this talk and then just simply say, well, we can't do anything ourselves. Ultimately, we have to follow the lead of the Americans. That's what we always do. We just have to follow.
That's going to be it. But I mean, between now and then, I don't know. But I mean, I was asked this repeatedly today, and I just said they will get in line eventually. Right. Eventually, right. Could we get the third world war in the middle? No, that's not impossible too. But I mean, I guess that's the what you and I are trying to understand here is that we know the basic confines of what the outcome of this ridiculous initiative is. I mean, are they prepared to eat crow? I mean, you say these things, and then. Right. Then you cave, and what kind of person? I mean, of course, Starmer is doing his, the best imitation of Churchill. Everybody's trying to be Churchill.
That's right. But that it has to move one way or the other. I mean, because you have, it's up to Zelensky. Zelensky said, well, I'm just going to stick with the Europeans. Then, and I'm not going to make any amends with Trump. Then it becomes quite difficult for him because I think at that stage, I mean, I think the aid is still coming from the United States. But if Zelensky throws in his lot with Starmer and Macron, then I think the Americans will pull the plug and say, well, that's it. I mean,
Well, I mean, and you know what, George?
Continue to send arms. Now, hey, that's it. You stick with your friends.
But this is, maybe this is the 5-dimensional chess that we keep hearing about. The Trump will say, well, so you want to take over for the Ukraine project? Go right ahead. Okay, right. Leave us out. Right. I may explain to you over and over and over again. I was on the campaign trail. I said it. This early in my administration. I'm taking the initiative. You do what you want with Ukraine. I'm talking to the Russians. Okay, we might meet somewhere in the middle. I mean, and for some people around Trump, this is a gift.
Right.
This is a gift.
I agree.
George has made it clear over and over again, and I'm in absolute agreement with him. So that I don't know what a brigade's 1,000 troops. I'm not.
Yeah,
I don't know something. But how are you going to get them there?
Yeah.
Without American air support, how are you going to get them there?
I can't see it. I think that at some point, cooler heads are going to prevail. I mean, all this big talk from Starmer and Macron, they're going to realize that you can't do it. And if you antagonize the Americans, then the consequences are quite serious, because I think then not only will the Americans just cut Ukraine off, they're going to begin to follow a policy of hostility against Ukraine. I mean, you could say the Americans might then start, joining forces with the Russians against Ukraine. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to use force against Ukraine, but actually begin to pursue a diplomacy of hostility.
They're going to say... They're going to say the Russians are actually right about Zelensky.
Yeah, exactly. They could absolutely change their view and say, no, this is Ukraine. Not only is it not our ally, it's actually a state antagonistic towards us. So they could suddenly find themselves really isolated from the Americans.
And this, again, be careful what you wish for. We all know that Trump is very ambivalent about NATO. J.D. Vance is as well. This is serving it up on a silver platter for them. I mean, they're saying, Trump is a disruptor of the transatlantic relationship. No, it's the Europeans that are doing it.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
That's why I thought this mistake, this meeting in Lancaster House was such a mistake. I should absolutely not have done this. They should have, maybe just cancel it. and instead go to tell Zelensky, you have got to eat humble pie. You've got to go talk to Trump, tell him that you're very, very sorry. Your English isn't very good. You're under a lot of stress. You were jet lagged. You didn't know what you were doing, and that it will never happen again. And you just tell him that and that's what I thought they would do. But by instead having this meeting, this very anti-Trump meeting, that's just calculated to infuriate Washington.
Well, and plus, it's hardly ever mentioned outside of a few podcasts, but the UK of all countries, Trump, you know how he feels about it. Russiagate came from the UK, came from Ukraine. Okay. I mean, his worst feelings about the UK are being vindicated right now. They're treacherous people, and they're out to get me.
Yeah. That's it.
And you think I'm such a slob that I'm going to change my mind because you've got an audience with the king for me? That's so degrading. It's so, it's sloppy seconds in the worst degree.
Well, let's see what our friends on the Gaggle locals page are saying. They're the people who worry about your dogs and about the mood that they're getting into, and that's very good. We got to keep the dogs happy. So Ivan Grozny says, good evening, Peter and George, hope you're doing well. Thank you. We hope you're doing well. Peter, I have a question for your perspective on things. I've never quite understood why Russia has not fought Ukraine like the US fought in Iraq, etc. To this day, it seems like they could step on the gas if they wanted to, less from a manpower perspective and more in terms of aerial combat. Theoretically, Russia should have air superiority if they have all the best missile tech that beats air defenses. Why hasn't Russia established air superiority? Air superiority.
Well, they do have
choose additional targets and fight full throttle, at least from an aerial perspective, like the US would do. Is it because they're afraid of NATO's reaction and humanitarian concerns? And what do you think? And George, please make sure to interrupt his answer.
I can see you're a frequent viewer. George and I interrupt each other in equal measure. Everybody.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what all right. So you want to answer, Peter?
George and I have talked about this many times. Okay, and I think there's a lot of ways to address it, and George and I have not always been on the same page. Upfront about that. And that is a discussion inside of Russia as well. Quite a few people talk about that. No one here I know is happy about this. They want it over. Okay, they don't want to win. You don't hear that. I want it to come to an end. I think that there is a sentimental element to this. The Russians and Ukrainians they're the same people, essentially. At least that's what Russians think. Now, there are certain Ukrainians that will tell you very differently. That's their business. Okay, fine. But, when all is said and done, Ukraine is still going to be Russia's neighbor. It's going to be a big neighbor. Okay. The Russian strategy is to wreck the war economy as much as they can to save a Russian life. That's obvious. Okay. But to destroy the entire economy and, immiserate the Ukrainian people with the intent of immiserating them, I don't even think that would be a popular policy here. Okay, because everybody in Russia has a relative in Ukraine somewhere. Okay, that's the way it works. The downside of it is that you could get quick and dirty, and you can destroy a lot, and Russia's international reputation would be tarnished, very much like the United States with Iraq and Afghanistan. This very slow process. There are pluses and there are minuses to it. George and I have discussed this so many times and argued about it many times as well. But my default position is that it's actually working. Working means progress is being made. And also another prong of this is that what the Russians wanted to happen with the West is exactly happening. It's actually to plan. The disarray, the disagreements, the divisions within the transatlantic alliance, all of these things, like more or less, were able to predict, and they've been right. Okay, but The frustration I've heard, and there were people, I remember in the first week of the SMO, there were people saying, they're just going to obliterate just Kiev. There'd be nobody left, but people kind of recoil to that because we want to get rid of this regime, these Nazis. What they did to our people in the Donbass for 8 years. We want to get rid of those people. We don't want to get rid of Ukrainians. No, far from it. See, that's the problem. Is that you have USAID pumping millions and millions of dollars into these fake NGOs and media to hate Russia, but it's not reciprocated. Like I said, Russians would recoil if there were really mass casualty civilian deaths.
Well, I agree with you about the mass casualty, but there's something short of mass casualty that you can do to Ukraine. I mean, I think you could have attacked much more seriously Ukraine's military capabilities, their air defense system, or destroyed their military infrastructure much more thoroughly. I mean, I think you don't want to do anything against the civilians, but that hasn't been done. And I mean, the fact
and
that
George, to back you up, is that we over the weekend there was a military school installation that was attacked. There was quite a few casualties, and when I hear that, I think, well, why after 3 years it's still there are these kinds of targets? I even asked those questions.
Right. That's right. And even the fact that Zelensky can, come and go with the with this ease. He just gets on a plane and nothing whatever happens to him, and all the Ukrainian officials just come and go, and it seems a very strange way of doing things. And again, Russians have suffered serious casualties, and indeed, Russian civilians, and indeed, Russian targets have been hit. Deep
terrorist attacks.
Yeah, exactly. So, I don't fully understand, to be honest. I haven't quite understood this strategy. I mean, I think I understood the early part of it, which I think was the regime change part of the military operation, because I think that was the problem, which is you go in, take out the Zelensky gang, kill them, or force them to sign some kind of an agreement. That I think that made sense. I mean, that's the way the Soviet Union used to do things. You go into the capital of the city. They did that in Budapest. They did that in Prague. They did that in Kabul as well. When they went into Afghanistan, you go into the capital, you take out the leader that is the problem, and then you install a friendly government. But so that was that early part that I understood. I mean, what happened subsequently, I have to say I can't really explain.
And also, to add to my position, it's not necessarily an argument, but it's more of an observation, is that the Russian military has been ordered, and we knew this from the day one of the SMO, is to demilitarize Ukraine. Right. Okay, that's different than defeating Ukraine or regime. These are different things. The military, and George and I have commented on before, they don't have their Storm Norman Schwarzkopf, that comes out bare chested and blah blah blah. And these generals they give you the facts and then they go away. They don't really take questions. They really don't explain what they're doing because they don't feel it's their job. Their job is there's a military unit over the ridge. Annihilate them, okay? Right. And it's a very different way of thinking, and maybe it's because of history. Because when you think of the Russians fighting Napoleon, I mean these are vast armies and all that. Russia's been doing this on a shoestring, everybody. This is a war on a shoestring, okay? And there have been people that have criticized it because doing that, we lose more lives, okay?
That's right. Absolutely. I agree. I agree with that. So you didn't get any loud disagreements between us, Ivan. So, but anyway, question.
Again, people misunderstand George and I disagreeing. There's a method to our madness. What, at least how I feel, is that we tease a lot of things out. Okay, I'm not looking to win an argument with George. That's a ridiculous. I wouldn't think about it. Okay, but teasing something out. Sometimes we're successful. Sometimes we say, well, we'll just leave it there. Okay.
Right. No, that's right. I mean, it's this is a very complex situation, and we're trying to figure things out. Where some things are just baffling, and we're trying to understand it. We can understand it. You can not understand it. I mean, it's difficult. There are a lot of things happening that are just very difficult to explain. So it's not a question of, well, I'm right and you're wrong. It's just difficult to conceptualize exactly what's going on.
One of the things I like to point out, I forgot to mention when George was showing us the Sunday shows, the Russians do have a plan. They've made it clear over and over again. And I find it very frustrating that we have Marco Rubio and Waltz and people like that. We have to bring them to the table to figure out what they want. Well, the Russians have already said they want a Ukraine not in NATO. If we go back and look at the confines of the Istanbul Agreement, severely limiting their military. And since the Istanbul Agreement, because as George has pointed out over and over again, the Istanbul Agreement was a super sweet deal for Ukraine. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. The territorial gains was completely to be determined in the future. Yeah, that's a huge admission for the Russians. Huge. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was just, amazing for them to turn that down. And it's a very interesting issue. And I think somebody wrote this, I can't remember who, that one reason why NATO wants to keep this war going is that they really don't want to, they don't want people to start examining exactly what happened over the past even going further back, 2014, maybe 2004, whatever, because it's going to be very, very bad look for NATO. In fact, when historians come to write this war, they are going to be extremely harsh in their judgments. And I think one of those is clearly that Istanbul the deal, which was so beneficial to Ukraine, so disadvantageous to Russia. Minsk, who violated Minsk? Again, they're lying, the media are lying, but eventually it is going to come out what really happened.
Zelensky lied in the Oval Office about prisoner exchanges.
Yes.
I mean, he was at one of them. He actually greeted some of the prisoners in one of the occasions, said that the Russians broke. He's bald-faced lies. And in the last news cycle or so, because antiwar.com takes the weekend off, I don't know if it came out on Friday or it came out earlier today, the OSCE that was monitoring the ceasefire in the Donbass, its documents have been revealed that they had compromised themselves, that they were in cahoots with the Kiev regime. Okay, the OSCE is tarnished itself so much. Okay, because that was always the institution that say we have to protect that. Why? Because everybody talks there. That's a venue for everyone to. Now the OSCE is so tainted. I wonder if it's of any use. It's of no use to Russia anymore, and that's a great.
No, that's right. And there's all sorts of other things that have been swept under the rug. I mean, the issue of the biolabs. What the hell were those biolabs in Ukraine? All what NATO has been doing all these years, that the military infrastructure that has been building all these years in Ukraine, all of that's going to come out. That's the point. Once there is a peace agreement, then essentially people are going to start looking into what really happened during those years, and there's going to be very, very harsh in its judgments on NATO. So that is very much to NATO's advantage. The longer this goes on, the less opportunity there'll be for anyone to re-examine what really went on during these years. Not to mention all the Ukraine's role in Russiagate and all the rest. Remember, Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election in quite a profound way. I mean, with the way they destroyed Manafort, a fake fraudulent issue with Manafort. The
And
letter.
everybody, that's not my opinion. That's not George's opinion. That was a huge article in Politico, brought to you by
Exactly.
USAID.
That's
Okay,
right. Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
Politico was talking about this.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Ukraine. That's right. Absolutely. Um, And so MKMRD, good evening. James H, good evening. Judy Hotchkiss, always very good to see you, Judy. Thank you very much, as always, for your generosity. So Judy asks, I think the Russians see this as a civil war. Remember that Lincoln tried to go soft on the South until near the end, until Sherman's march to the sea. The resentment and rage continued through modern times. The emotions are still there, with viewing Gone with the Wind or listening to Joan Baez singing The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Oh, that's a very, very.
There's an element of that. I agree with it, but there are exceptions, like Mariupol. Okay, that was an Azov stronghold. Okay,
Right.
and that was annihilated. Okay, and they
Right.
made them surrender. There, I like the Civil War motif. It works very well with me. But there's no compromise with those elements, not at all. And the fact that Erdogan let them go, which, oh, geez, George and I just
Right.
couldn't get our heads around that one.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But I think it's true that Lincoln did. I mean, he really did want a reconciliation with the South. I mean, he did. He did have
But
Dixie played on the White House lawn. I mean,
okay, what was it? It was charity,
yeah, with
charity for all and malice towards
with
none.
malice towards none. Yeah, that's right. And he did. Right there on the day that General Lee surrendered. He had he played Dixie in the White House. He I think definitely wanted reconciliation with the South. I mean, eventually it came, but it took some time.
Well, Rupert Fellows writes, Putin interfered in the Ukrainian civil war to protect Russian-speaking Russia. No, it was the West that created the civil war that drew Russia into it. Okay, again, the Russian side is very rarely presented, but George and I have often reflected upon the fact that from 2014 to 2022, Putin lost public opinion points by being too soft. Russian meddling in Ukraine, and Russians were saying the Russian government isn't doing enough meddling in Ukraine to protect these people, okay? Because the vast majority of the 14,000 people that were killed were civilians, okay? And the Russians were, we want to make the Minsk process work, and all along we knew that the West treated it as a fraud, okay? So, I saw some documentary films that came out of the Donbass, and they were horrifically critical of Vladimir Putin.
No, I very, very much so. And remember, I mean, the first fraud, the first stolen election came in 2004. Remember, I mean, Yanukovych won that election. And then they had a third round. They had two rounds that Yanukovych had won, and then they had a third round, completely unheard of, to ensure that Yanukovych lost in 2004. And yet the Russians accepted it and worked with the Timoshenko government that came after 2004, even though it was extremely unpopular. And then, of course, Yanukovych was back. So he again kind of won on the election. Second time he wins an election, and again it's stolen from him. And again, the Russians worked with the post election theft regime that was of Poroshenko. Sat down with him in Minsk and worked something out with Minsk. So the Russians again have bent over backwards, essentially working with illegitimate leaders, a succession of illegitimate leaders in Ukraine, illegitimate leaders whose goal all along was to push Ukraine into NATO in the face of opposition from a very substantial portion of its population. They did this. They went out of their way to violate all the pledges that Ukraine had made at the time of its leaving of the Soviet Union, its declaration of sovereignty. So in the face of that, they just kept pushing for NATO membership. Of course, they were, that's what the Americans wanted, that's what the Europeans wanted, but it wasn't in any way what the Ukrainians wanted.
And all the while, NATO was building up its forces.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
and a huge. George is right. It's all. We know quite a bit about the NATOization of Ukraine before the special military operation. We're going to learn a whole lot more.
That's right. That's right. Anyway, Stone River, very good to see you, Stone River. Thank you for your generosity. Stone River says Trump's gambling with World War III comment seems to be conveniently ignored, let alone that this would be between nuclear powers. That's very interesting. I think you're right. He said that, and it hasn't really been commented upon because Trump got into that quite early on. With it, you're gambling with World War III, and I think that added to his anger and frustration that Zelensky is kind of arrogant and he's throwing his weight around, but essentially what he's really after is to get the Americans involved in a war with Russia, and that's why that's what angered him. And it's high time an American leader said that you're gambling with World War III. You're pushing us into something that could be a global catastrophe. And I think that was very interesting that Trump did that, and and made that clear that this is really a very serious issue. And that's all he's doing here with all this talk, security guarantees. It's just a mechanism to get the Americans in a war with Russia.
Every American president, upon taking office, has explained what the nuclear football is, what
Right.
their role is with the codes and all of that, and it's explained to them what Armageddon will look
Right.
like.
Right.
And if you're like George Bush Sr., he'd been through the whole system, CIA director and all that. You get inured to that. I think Trump, when they explained it to Trump, it's like, what? I mean, I'm the one that's going to have to decide
Right.
that tens, hundreds of millions of people could die.
Right.
You can say Trump is a very unserious person on many things. I think that made an impact on him. It's just like,
Right.
yeah,
No, I think so. And I think
serious.
exactly. And but the fact that he talked about this indicates that he's been thinking about this. This is something he's been thinking about. And he's nonetheless he's committed himself to some kind of a mutually acceptable peace agreement. But when Zelensky makes clear he's not interested in any kind of peace agreement, and all that he really wants is essentially a commitment from the Americans to go to war on his behalf. Once he realized that, that's when he said, you're gambling with World War III. And I think he got angry. I've never seen Trump angry before because, Trump is usually sarcastic, he's nasty, he's mean. But this is the first time I've actually seen him angry. He seemed, really angry with Zelensky. And I think that response afterwards, when they basically said lunch is canceled, the signing is canceled, and also you need to leave the White House immediately. The car's waiting, please leave. You could say Trump was really.
George, I'm looking at the time. We have 1 hour, 22 minutes. I don't want us to go block screen.
Right, we got a few more minutes, so we can do. Anyway, Stone River again asks, could you fine gentlemen do a deep dive at some point on the Minsk Accords? Not what various leaders have said, we know that, but what their key elements were and which party and when and how violated them or failed to take the necessary action to implement them. I mean, I can just do a very quick.
And don't forget the sticking point was the border, control of the border.
Right, exactly. Well, I mean, the point about the Minsk Accords, and we've talked about this many times, that it was supposed to be an agreement between Kiev and the breakaway republics, between the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, and it was supposed to be a step-by-step reconciliation process, at the end of which Russian forces would leave Ukraine. But it wasn't at the beginning; it was at the end of the step-by-step process, and a key part of the step-by-step process was a change in the Ukraine's constitution, whereby Donetsk and Lugansk would acquire special status. So they didn't spell it out, autonomy, that it would become a republic or whatever. Just it would acquire special status within Ukraine. But that was never. They never made that change to the constitution. Instead, they kept talking about how Russia was supposed to uh, take its forces out of Ukraine. But that was only supposed to be at the end of the process. It wasn't supposed to be at the beginning. And it's a very short document, but nobody ever bothers to look at the document and see how it's
It's
spelled
one
out.
page. It's
It's
one
one
page.
page. At one page. And again, it was between Kiev and the breakaway republics. It wasn't between Kiev and Moscow. And again, that's always distorted. And basically, they didn't really. Kiev didn't do anything, and so therefore, since they didn't get the special status, and they didn't have the amnesty. There was also another aspect: was an amnesty, that there wouldn't be prosecution against anyone who had rebelled against the rule of the junta, because there was a junta in Kiev. There wouldn't be any prosecutions. Even that change wasn't made.
And all the while, everyone, these two republics were blockaded. There was illegal trade, and Poroshenko probably was involved in that. Okay,
right.
And you have to remember these two republics. They're the workhorse, the industrial workhorse of Ukraine. That's they say, look at this, the sliver on this. That's where a lot of the economy. Kiev has the financial services, and then the Donbass is the industrial workhorse. Okay, mineral extraction, all these kinds of things here. And so, to get a birth certificate, they were denied that. It wasn't recognized. Burying somebody, what about someone's will? All of that was blockaded. Okay, and so what it did was the people of these two republics, or oblasts, they looked to Russia for help, and the Russians helped them because Kiev has cut us off. We're under blockade. We can't even get water.
Right.
They cut off everything to these people.
That's right.
And so what are you going to do? Are you going to get on your knees and beg, or are you going to say, hey, Moscow, can you help us out here? And people took private initiative. Private. People got on trains and went there, and they helped their relatives. Okay.
Right.
I mean, this is the most idiotic, stupid thing. Okay, I mean, we want control over these two oblasts, and they're doing everything they can to push them away.
Right, exactly. Yes, we're reintegrating people that we're trying to inflict pain on. And then they're going to feel themselves an integral part of Ukraine. I mean, it was an absurdity. Of course, the more they did this, the less likelihood that they would ever accept rule from Kiev. And then again, we have to keep in mind that they had a referendum. There was a referendum that they held in 2014 to join the Russian Federation, and Russia had said no. Russia had actually told them no. In fact, they wanted them to cancel the referendum. They actually didn't want them to hold a referendum. They held a referendum. They wanted to join the Russian Federation, and Russia denied them, even though Putin had said in his famous 2021 essay on Ukraine, said these territories were Russian. They were basically taken from Russia by the Bolsheviks and stuffed into Ukraine against the wishes of the native population. Anyway,
and because of the blockade, the people of the Donbass, they requested Russian citizenship because they wanted to be able to be involved in economy. What about banking? They were denied any kind of banking access. So they went through the Russian banking system. Okay, I mean, everything that Kiev did pushed them away and integrate. They were already integrated into the Russian economy even before the start of the special military operation.
Yeah. Anyway, Stone River also has another question. So anyway, thank you so much for Stone River for your very generosity. He says Trump revealed that he sympathizes with Putin too, being a victim of Russiagate. Quite a bond forged there. That was kind of amusing when Trump put it in that way, that he and I know Putin very well, is that he and I went through Russiagate together. Well, I think Trump was being very, very sophisticated there. He's saying because essentially we both wanted to improve relations during first term. We had that meeting in Helsinki, and we couldn't do anything. We absolutely couldn't do anything because the only thing anyone wanted to know about was Russiagate, and it just collapsed. It was a complete waste of time for everybody, that meeting in Helsinki, because everyone just kept accusing Putin of having interfered in the Russian election, and then accusing Trump of going soft on Putin. So that's why he said we kind of forged a bomb there because we couldn't do anything because of Russiagate.
Yeah, and again, this is a motif that George and I keep bringing up: is that Russiagate bled into foreign policy in a very toxic way, and
Right.
it handicapped Trump in his first term. Russiagate and COVID handicapped him,
Right.
And I don't know. I don't know what really happened in the 2020 election, but he
Bad
definitely
things
was.
happen. A lot of bad things.
Bad things happen. There you go. That's a good way of putting it. Bad things happened. Okay, when there are more ballots than voters, bad things
Exactly.
happen.
All right, so Peter, I think it's we can make a gracious exit now. So thank you very much. Thank you everybody who joined us. Thank you so much for all your really interesting, fascinating questions and comments. We couldn't get to everything, because of time constraints, and we will see what happens. This sounds like this might be quite a busy week as well. But thank you all, and we will be back next Monday at the same time. Until then, all the best. See you soon. Bye-bye.